some quick framing. For folks who are joining us in the audience, invite you to connect with each other and with us in the chat. If you could, as we're kind of kicking off, go ahead and share your name, your org, and if there's a big key question that you're thinking about internally with your staff, team, with your program related to this topic. My name is John Cape. I'm the Vice President of Programs at Global Health Corps. One of the panelists is also from my organization, so I will let her more fully introduce GHC. But I am very excited to be moderating this very timely conversation. When the pandemic began, I know we kind of all collectively kind of navigated a collective shift to a largely, if not exclusively, virtual program. And that's been a major learning curve, I think, for most of us. We've been adopting new technologies, considering the impact of those on the design of our program. We've collectively learned new vernacular, like Zoom fatigue. We've collectively regretted not investing in Zoom much earlier, so we could all be multimillionaires in this sector. Candidly, when we transitioned online at the beginning of the pandemic, I assumed that we'd swing fully back into in-person as soon as we could safely do so. But I think we've all kind of can acknowledge that the reality is more complex. So pragmatically, there are travel restrictions, there's the safety of our community, that we serve and lead, and those continue. Financially, I think we are all beginning to kind of recognize the relative costs of in-person versus virtual programming. And pedagogically, I think there's been a lot more deeper reflection in our sector on the merits of in-person versus remote programming. How we're also thinking about how we're using other technologies beyond just video conferencing to kind of learn and connect. So I'm excited for this panel today. These are all leaders who are weighing these considerations, who are making decisions about the future of community engagement in their programming. We're going to do a quick round of introductions. Panelists, I'll ask you just to introduce yourself and give us a brief overview of your organization or what you represent today, so we have some sense of that. And then I will kick it off with some questions. Again, folks who are in the audience, as we go, if you've got a question for the panel, feel free to drop that into the chat, and I will incorporate that as we go. So first, just some quick introductions. Elikim, why don't I start with you?
Thank you so much, John. And again, thank you for really putting together this panel. And I am super excited to be here to share and learn with all of you on a topic that feels important and timely. So I'm Elikim Tometi Archer. I'm the Chief Program Officer at Global Citizen Year. At Global Citizen Year, we are developing a critical mass of future leaders by equipping young people worldwide with the insights, skills, and the global network to build a more equitable and sustainable world. Pre-pandemic, we did this through a signature fellowship program. We sent about 150 young people each year to live and learn alongside the global majority in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. In the last 18 months or so, we've been doing that through our academy program, which is a virtual program. I'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit later about that pivot and what we learned. We are learning from that. But I just, again, thank you, John, for putting together this panel, and I'm super excited to be here with all of you.
Great, thanks. Ruth, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, John. My name is Ruth Ahmed. I'm the Director of Fellowships at Global Health Corps, so I have the privilege of working with John. The work that our organization does is we're just a leadership accelerator mobilizing a really powerful network of health equity change makers. And what that looks like in practice is we run a 13-month fellowship program. We're currently running it out of 4 placement countries, so Uganda, Rwanda, Malawi, and Zambia. And we recruit our fellows, they come in, and we partner with different organizations from the ministries of health in different countries to grassroots organizations, multinational nonprofits, to kind of identify those areas where innovation is required and place fellows with them while we give them the skills that they need to be the leaders we want to see in the health equity space. So very glad to be on this panel. Looking forward to discussing more.
Thanks, Ruth. Badul, over to you.
Hi, I'm Badul Hassan. I'm a director within Acumen Academy. Acumen Academy is part of Acumen overall, whose mission is to change the way the world tackles poverty. Within Acumen Academy, we are the World School for Social Change, where we're trying to catalyze builders with the character and competence to create a more just, inclusive, and sustainable world. We programmatically have a number of different areas. We have online courses that have reached millions around the world, all geared towards social sector leaders, social entrepreneurs, and social entrepreneurs. We have fellowship programs, which is the connecting theme of this summit and gathering. And we also have accelerator programs, both business as well as leadership accelerator programs.
Great. Thank you, Batul. And Britt, over to you.
Thanks, John. So Britt Yamamoto, I was recently told that I am the founder of a family of social enterprises, which was a nice description, I think, of the various hats I wear. I am here today largely representing as the CEO and co-founder of an organization called Perennial. We do leadership development with social sector leaders from around the world and have been doing this work for just about 15 years. Up until the last couple of years, of course, everything was in person, very intensive programs, and have, of course, had to make that pivot like all of you have. I'm also here as a faculty member at the University of Washington, where I've actually been teaching what I only recently learned is actually the largest course at the University of Washington. We have about 12 to 15,000 students per year in a leadership and management in global health course, which since 2014 has been almost entirely done asynchronously, and it's a non-matriculated, it's for non-matric students. So these are healthcare professionals, largely based in Africa, the Middle East, and throughout Latin America, and has gone on to be an incredibly successful model of distance learning. And so this was, of course, something that happened many years ago. And so as a result of the success of that course, which only I think has like a 92 or 93% retention rate, which for those of you who do online learning know that's just remarkable as an outcome. And we attribute a lot of that just to the way in which the course is structured and focused on relationship, despite it being an asynchronous course. So anyway, I come here sort of representing multiple organizations, multiple work, and just happy to sort of speak into the collective around some of the learning of the last year, and then also over a longer arc.
Great, thanks. Thanks to you all for being here with us today. Let's start off with talking about Global Citizen Year. It's been a big couple of years for you all, and as the Chief Program Officer, you oversaw a huge pivot. And I know in conversations with you, we both were kind of reflecting on kind of the surprises and the learnings that we've made from the pivot that you've made that is resonance with a lot of other folks. So would love to hear about how the program model changed with Global Citizen Year and what you've learned from that.
Thanks, John. And I'm already excited because Batul says something about how they've been able to retain 92% retention for their program, which is asynchronous. And so I'm like, I really want to hear a little bit more about that because our program is not in our pivot. But so backing up a little bit, March of last year, we were in the middle of our fellowship cycle. So a fellowship, young people, 17 to 21 years is sort of the age group in which we focus on. We're in country, in the 4 programmatic countries that we were in March of last year, getting to the end of their 8-month-long program in country when the pandemic hit and we had to evacuate them. It was a really long weekend from a Thursday night to a Monday morning, getting out 150 young people going to 32 countries globally. We did that, and we thought we were going to take a break and sort of rethink what we do next. But it really became clear to us immediately that because of the age group we served and because a lot of those young people's college, university, even gap years had really been disrupted. Because of the pandemic, we really had to come up with a way to support them and rethink our programming through the year. We couldn't just sort of wait for things to get better. In doing that, there were a few questions we were trying to solve for. And I think at the top line of that question was, how do we bring a decade-long learning from a very global and place-based immersive program into a virtual space? That I think at the top line was what we were solving for. How do we create the same sense of community and connectedness that happens when you are in person together? And we, pre-pandemic, I think we're very focused and very married to the experiential learning, that you had some learning only happened in place-based learning. And so taking those concepts into a virtual space was really new for us. The other question we were trying to solve for was, given everyone's lived experience will be different in the global context. So when you are in a virtual space, the lived experience that people were going through will be different. How do you foster a shared sense of connection and learning, and also honor the differences in those lived experiences in real time? Then for a program, as the head of programs, we also wanted to know that will we be able to translate the high impact of our learning outcomes from the immersive program into the virtual space? Yes, we had adapted those learning outcomes. We had adapted our curriculum to be able to deliver in the virtual space, but will we see the same kinds of high levels of impact and learning outcomes we were seeing? And we were looking at skills and behaviors like self-awareness, relationship skills, perspective taking, critical thinking, and creative thinking, things that we thought really we had honed over the last decade through our immersive programming. So backing up, like I'll spare you like the long spring and summer of long hours and late nights trying to do this. But we launched the Academy fall of last year. And so right now we are in our third cycle of Academy students. One of the first top line thing we learned was that, yes, we can still meet our learning outcomes. And we saw this through both our internal evaluations and also our external impact assessment that is done by a team in Harvard for us. When it came to the idea or the topic of building community, this we found, and no surprise to anybody here, is that you have to build a community intentionally in the virtual space, just like you had to do in an in-person program or context. For us, one of our learnings, and this is why Badul's learning is very interesting to me, is that there is power in shared experience. There is something that is powerful about the trust and connection that is built by people having the same shared experience. So for us, one of our takeaways was that having a synchronous program was important to building the trust and connection. So for example, this semester we have 60 students from 60 countries. Last semester was 90 countries, but we also have, we have still kept the program synchronous. And there's a whole story behind the logistical nightmare of trying to schedule that. But we believe there's something powerful about the connection that is created when people are having the same experience together. We've kept the cohorts and class sizes small. So even though it's a 250 class size class, for the 12-week that you are in the program, you are in a class or a seminar with 19 plus 1, so 19 students plus 1 instructor, and then a small group of 10 students that meets twice a week. So again, the trust and community is built with this small group of people. And that is really a learning also we brought from our immersive program. Even though we sent the 150 students in their fellowship, your cohort was a cohort of 10 that you really worked through the 8 months that you were in country. So that is sort of how we've done the community building in the course or the formal piece of it. There's also community building that happens outside of the class, the course or the formal part of the experience. This, we have found that the first important thing is to learn about the tools and spaces that young people are. Like Facebook is not it for like Gen Z. They are not on Facebook. Instagram, WhatsApp, Discord, TikTok are the preferred groups for the preferred apps for the places or the places that they are connecting for our age group of 17 to 21. So Facebook, you can't really be building a program around Facebook. You have to be in the spaces that they are in. Also, like an in-person program, comfort and validation are super important to creating a sense of belonging and trust with participants. And I sort of want to put a pin here. For me, I think the comfort and validation actually doesn't start when they are in the program. So we work closely with our recruitment team, we work closely with our admissions team to make sure that the whole experience, there's a through line in meeting them where they are, making sure that we are hearing them so that they can show up as their authentic selves. And in the virtual space, you see this with like the number of posts, likes, emojis, shares, things like that. That's how the validation and the comfort and the safe space is sort of reflected back to you. I also think we've learned that you have to set the right expectation. The virtual space, the community that you are building, is not going to be the replacement for their TikToks or the other spaces they are in. So pegging our expectation of how many of our students will be actively involved in our community was important. And then we also take a step back every now and then. You have to balance the amount of staff and adults in their spaces. And so I don't actually think this, I think one of the things we learned is that community is not built organically. You have to have intentionality in creating activities, creating ways for people to connect online, but you also have to leave space for the organic, right? You can't start thinking just putting the things out there, people will connect. That was our first semester. We had all these nice spaces and nobody was showing up in the spaces. We had to learn that you have to create some of these things and then you have to back up and sort of balance. So I think that's sort of high level, some of the things that we've done and some of our learnings in really pivoting from a very deeply immersive program to a virtual program serving a global community. And I think the last thing is access. Obviously, the immersive program was, whilst we wanted it to be a global program, and I said we had 32 countries represented when we were evacuating, this semester we have 60 countries, and the semester before that we had 90 countries. So the access and the opportunity to reach more people through the virtual space is one of the things that we were surprised by and very excited about the potential in the virtual space.
Thank you, Elikim. Man, there's so many great, I think, considerations you're making on design and how to create that intentional structure that allows for those organic connections. Ruth, I know Global Health Corps has focused a lot in past years on the in-person programming. So I'd love to hear kind of what resonates from what Elikim has shared and how you are thinking about what design for an organization like GHC will be going forward. How much of it's in-person versus remote versus some sort of hybrid, and how you make those determinations.
Thanks, John. Elikim said a lot of things that resonated. Honestly, I remember in March of 2020, just working with all the people on our team to evacuate fellows and just being so terrified about how unprecedented everything was and how uncertain we were about every single last detail, when the last flights were going to be available, kind of deliberating about whether fellows wanted to stay in country or not. And, you know, working in the health space and being, you know, directly affected by that, both in terms of our programming, but then challenging our value system as well in how we went through the process was just really a really important consideration, and it still remains one as we start thinking about in-person meetings again, as opposed to what we've been doing, which is predominantly virtual. So to answer your question, our in-person retreats and connections were really a major theme about our culture at GHC. It was, we had this very big beginning of the fellowship in-person meet where everyone gets to meet for the first time. And, there's all of this excitement and anticipation and charging up leading to it. And all our staff team gets involved in one way or the other. And there's just a lot of content. It was pretty much like a boot camp right before everyone went out. And so it's just really strange for us to have to start thinking about a lot of how to form those connections virtually. And a lot of our programming was really focused on how people were in real time accommodating the differences that we were intentionally presenting them with, how they were interacting with the challenges around diversity. We have a co-fellow model where one international fellow was paired with a national fellow very intentionally, because we understood what that juxtaposition of cultures does in terms of creating unique perspectives in terms of challenging where we sit naturally, even when we think we're open-minded, until we are presented with a differing opinion. And a lot of the value of that was really seen in the physical interactions, just, presenting them there all at once, and then having the boot camp experience, and then meeting your co-fellow, having to have this very intentional conversations, whether it is about living arrangements, if they were going to live together, or working arrangements and work styles. And so having to just rethink all of that and see how a virtual platform would accommodate those interactions was really challenging. But one of our values that we share with our fellows is adapting and innovating. And so that's something that we threw back to ourselves in pivoting from fully in-person fellow interactions to online. The benefit that we have is that we have a really large alumni community, which is really the focus of the work that we try to do, at least where we see the impact and where we want to continue to see the impact after the 13 months. And they had been doing online work. So, you can't really have 1,000 people at a conference, at the drop of the hat. So they figured out how to curate spaces that were unique to their areas of interest. And there was a lot of borrowing that we did really early on in terms of that shift from our in-person to modeling around some of the interactions that we'd seen. But it really did take revising the programs that we had, revising the language in our curriculum design, figuring out how to use breakout rooms instead of, if we're at a hotel, there's a group that's walking to the pool or staying in place or whatever. And it was all very physical. And so right now we are doing a little bit of both. We actually have the first in-person full cohort programming that we have had in 2 years coming up in January. So we're really excited for that. But what we have learned is the balance between both of them. So as the director of fellowships, and thinking about our strategy around curriculum design, a lot of what I've been thinking about is breadth and depth. So what the virtual world has presented to us is the opportunity to have so much more inclusivity, whether it is with our speakers. A lot of the times in the past, we would be in situations where we would want to fly someone to one of our conferences, but there's a conflict a day before or after the day that they're supposed to speak, or there's just an inability for them to move, and that's a complete loss. So we have to write somebody like that off from our programming. And in having the virtual context, somebody just has to call in, even though they had a fully booked day, they can do 45 minutes in the afternoon just for one day. And so we've seen a lot of benefits like that in our virtual programming, the ability to include alumni in our programming, where it's like, being in the nonprofit space, you don't necessarily always have the funds to curate physical experiences that have every single person that you want. And in thinking about how we're going to do this moving forward, there is obviously that, years and years of doing in person and knowing what works in terms of creating that real-time challenge to the fellows and seeing how they interact with it and hold it. And as we like to say, lean into the discomfort of the challenge that is broken health systems. But in learning and exploring the virtual space, we just realized that, we can have it more frequently. So one of the things that we did with our virtual programming is we had to do our boot camp online, and that resulted in us thinking about how to introduce some of the things that we couldn't do in 4 hours of a day of programming that used to typically be a whole day. And we started what we call our Leadership Academy. So following our major training institute at the beginning of the fellowship, we introduced a Leadership Academy every couple of weeks for the first 90 days. So, doing a big push in tracking the progress in real time. And, in thinking about the fact that we were so focused on in-person before, we hadn't really taken the time to conceptualize what we could be doing to walk through the fellows' experience in real time like that. We definitely knew that we couldn't meet them every 2 weeks and bring them back together. But now we have the experience of what that does, how that translates in real-time surveys every couple of weeks. So that's not something that's going away anytime soon. At the same time, we've had the opportunity to have so much more integration in terms of our alumni and fellowship models, where they were typically siloed in terms of programming. So we would have an in-person, fellowship program and an in-person alumni program, but because everything is online, people can opt into the things that they can attend and determine what kind of interactions they want to be a part of. Another thing with the hybrid program is that even though we are having in person, we still have a lot of avenues and platforms for fellows and alums to participate. We have a community portal, which when everything was kind of in person, there wasn't that much of a challenge to go to one place to get the information because you knew you were having those physical interactions. But we've seen so many more groups form on the platforms that we curated for that specific experience. We see a lot of people sharing on those platforms, where before they would just wait for one point in the year where they would meet people. And so the beautiful thing about this whole experience is, even though we thought that it was going to be just for a couple of months and we'd go back to our normal way of doing things, we have been elevated by the experience to this beautiful way of thinking about how we can merge the breadth that online gives us with the depth and of the in-person experience.
Thanks, Ruth. I think that's a really helpful framework in thinking about that. And I think one of the things that resonates probably with a lot of folks is that ability to access different communities or connect different communities in ways that can be much more difficult in person. Badul, I know Acumen has also been using technology in really innovative ways to connect community members. And now we're going beyond just like the in-person kind of retreats. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences with technology and connecting your community?
Yeah, and just to echo, I think there's a lot of shared experience in having programs that were predominantly in person and the transition to virtual. I think luckily, because we've had a community of online courses and online programs, and have experience with how do you do adult learning in an engaged way online, we were able to pivot more quickly. And actually, I think we used last year not just to quickly move into delivering our programs virtually, but also measuring them and seeing, hey, these were the learning outcomes and assumptions with in-person delivery. We were able to track and see, well, what actually translated through which mediums, And did we hit those learning outcomes and objectives, and what would we iterate and change? So Ruth, Alec, I'm like happy to talk to you guys, offline about that more later. And I'm sure Britt has a lot to add into this too. But getting specifically to what John wanted us to talk about. So I'm going to kind of focus in a little bit more just on community. We have about 10 fellowship programs around the world in different regions for the last 10 plus years. We also have accelerator programs, all done virtually. And all the people who go through these fellows programs and accelerator programs are all geared towards social sector builders, right? You could be working in problems of poverty in your community in India or in East Africa, it doesn't matter. But once you graduate or go through the program, you enter into what we call the Foundry. The Foundry is really the core community of builders who have gone through a deep learning experience with Acumen Academy, and now they are part of our community forevermore. And we believe that leadership is a lifelong journey. I'm sure this resonates for a lot of folks. And so our goal isn't to say, hey, we delivered a program and in-depth experience and we're done. It's really, what do you do with these individuals afterwards? And many have written a lot around, the use of the term alumni versus community, but they're active people in our community who are continuing to innovate in the work that they do, and their needs continue to evolve even as they grow themselves or their organizations. And so how do you accompany them through that lifelong journey at the same time? So in the Foundry, at present, we have about 1,000 individuals who've had deep learning experiences through Acumen Academy. And we focus on the Foundry to try to keep providing them support and what they need or don't. I've had this conversation with a number of folks, I think, who are even participating on the call. Some of the core needs that our Foundry members and community members consistently say are threefold. They seek access to connections, they seek access to coaching, and they seek access to capital. And it's again and again, we see these themes. And even within connections, there's subheadings. So in connections, they want learning opportunities, they want communities of practice, they want knowledge sharing ability peer-to-peer as well as outside to the broader Acumen network itself. They want access to technical support. As you go, everyone, I think, within this space seeks access to capital and coaching. Just, can't say it enough how important and critical that is. And the connections piece is probably one of the hardest nuts to crack. I think when you have a small community, having a person focused on community to enable and engender connection is still manageable. But as it grows exponentially, it becomes harder and harder to do. And so one of the experiments that we've done, our community team, we have individuals called community animators, and their role is to really just understand the needs, and therefore provide the services and the connections to this community to keep them as active and vibrant and engaged. And I think, Elkim, it's to your point, like you can create beautiful spaces, but if no one shows up and it's not meaningful, then what? And so it's not just about the events that we're curating, it's really the peer-to-peer connections. And I think that's where the conversation with John really unfolded, is around the use of technology. And so we've experimented at the end of last year and into this year. And it's an experiment and a pilot. And as our community grows, we want to make sure that the burden or the effectiveness of the community animators increases as the core community increases. At 1,000, we're going to go 3,000, 10,000, and even more. And one thing we've seen is the use of GPT-3. I'm not sure how familiar folks are with that, but what it really stands for is generative pre-trained transformers. It's the next-gen language of prediction, next-gen language prediction model that was created by OpenAI. And what it basically does is it's better at creating algorithms that can source and find content from your own information or data set or the internet data set, and it can be used to provide information itself. So it's like self-generated. And it's a pilot right now because we want to see how smart and how good and how effective can it actually be. The data set we provide is essentially, it's 1,000. If we have 1,000 community members in our Foundry right now, we have a member directory. They have information that they've populated in their bios. We've asked our community members, what support do you need? What support are you willing to offer? All this information and data is available in the member directory. But people send in requests. It's like, oh, I'm sitting in India working in mental health during the time of COVID. I'm looking for, really good resources or materials. Has anyone come across good resources or materials around mental health in other geographies? So they'll throw out a general request. And it's harder for a community animator to then scour the annals and find, well, who are those people? What GPT-3 would do instead is that if the community animator just entered in the request to GPT-3, then it will pop up the 5 best responses. So we ran a pilot to see, and with clear learning objectives for the pilot, we ran it over 2 months. Our learning objectives were, does it make good matches? The 5 recommendations, does it pop up? Are they good? 2, does it save the animator time instead of how much time they'd have to actually spend? And then what's the user experience like for the community animator themselves? Like, are they actually able to use it, or is it not as effective? And I think in the span of 2 months, we saw 75 to 80 requests come in, 5 responses that were generated, and we were rating the responses as we go. So if someone was working in mental health in India or Bangladesh, and they popped up, people that they could connect with in 5 other regions, could we rate like, oh, that's a good connection, right? So you're actually testing and checking the data. And so far, I think we saw up to 70% what we called great matches. So on a scale of 1 to 5, and there were about, I think, 20% were kind of good or like partially good matches, and then the rest were poor. And what we've seen is that as time progressed and the algorithm got better, the matches got better over time. And there's a couple of different GPT-3 models that are out there, and we were testing with all 3. I think there's 5 total. We were testing with 3 of them. And so there's some models that were working really, really well. And our goal is to see, can they get better at making those and fostering those peer-to-peer connections? We already use some of this internally for, like basic questions. When members or community members write in, and over time, people keep asking the same questions over and over and over again. When we try to use AI to have all the information available so that they can actually answer those questions auto-generated through bots rather than through an individual, and just to be more effective just at the knowledge sharing part, let alone the connections part. But our goal is to just improve on how these connections are fostered, and can we do it more in a more automated way such that community members can gain meaningful value from the connections, and then see what else is possible and what else we can do. But it's been interesting. It's been interesting to see where we can go.
Thanks, Badul. It's just so fascinating, right, to be thinking about where that edge is with technology in our sector, and the ability to use it to really build even more intimate connections, those one-on-one connections that people are going to really be able to leverage. Britt, you have, I think, so much deep experience, but really this bird's eye view, just because of all of the different initiatives you're involved in. And I will say again, wow, I mean, to have over 90% retention in one of those courses is ridiculous. Like, that's exceptional. So I would love to hear from you, when you think about building community and the role of technology in amplifying that, like, what are some of the big takeaways or learnings or principles that you have that you've gleaned from your experience?
Yeah, it's a big question. And of course, in the interest of time, I'll try to be very succinct. So we've all learned a lot in the last couple of years, particularly about how to transition what we were doing in person to do it largely virtual. And I think, and this is a broad generalization, but most of us, if not all of us, have more negative experiences in these spaces than positive ones. We've become very attuned to what poor online experiences look and feel like, unfortunately. And I actually think, there's going to be a long time before we fully sort out all of the learning from what's been happening. But one of the things I feel quite strongly is that this has sort of ushered in an age of learning design, and particularly for those of us who sort of plant our flag around reflective, experiential, collaborative learning and not didactic learning. And frankly speaking, and hopefully this won't be too inflammatory, but I think a lot of our programs aren't really that. They are very didactic, and they are packaged as being connective and transformational, but they're largely information delivery models, which frankly speaking, technology helps a lot with. But what's happened is that when you're in person, there's a lot that in person can kind of paper over with that, because you're there, you're with people, and you know, you can look and feel people. But when we are physically separate, as we are when we are like this, you can't lean on that. You have to have a design that actually is pointed toward connection. It has to be more thoughtfully delivered than just, hey, go into your breakout room and just talk about stuff. And you know, like, those don't work. I mean, it just doesn't work, you know. So so I feel like it's revealed a lot of the holes in the design of a lot of these programs, and even just ours included, and the different ones I'm involved in. I mean, having to tighten those up and realize that we can't just take what worked in person and think that it's going to just plop down into a virtual space and be the same thing. That said, you know, one of the guiding principles for me in both the redesign, but also just in thinking about virtual spaces, is this sort of idea of, I can feel you feeling me. And I don't think I need to be in person to experience that. And if that's the foundation for what, you know, I'm pointed to in trying to create some transformational experience for people, from that starting point, now we start to design in a very different way, right? Not, do you understand me? Not, can I deliver my information to you in the most efficient way? But again, can I feel you feeling me? And I don't know about you, but I've felt that countless times over the last year and a half, having one-on-ones or groups or, you know, thousands of people together. It can be done, and it can be done well, but just like anything, it has to be designed and executed well, right? So the whole idea that we would just move to a virtual space and there would be all these people who would know how to do it well, was really just naive, and still even is naive, I think, you know, because it's a skill set, and it's a learning design skill set, and it's a space holding facilitating skill set, and it's all those things that we value, and we know what that looks and feels like in an in-person space. So so anyway, I think this is like an age of learning transformation. I'm excited about it, and you know, in the interest of time, of course, I would be happy to share anything that we've learned, but maybe that's more for a follow-up.
Thanks. You all won't believe this, but we're at the top of our time together. Next year, I will ask IFS for double the time. I think what resonates from this is, even as we're coming into this space where we suddenly have the opportunity to think about what in-person looks like again, it is requiring us to think about if that is always the right strategy. But more importantly, what are the design principles that we can apply in any of those spaces? So I appreciate recognizing our own learning curve as designers, our own opportunity to really use this period of time to get better at connecting communities and to really understand all of the tools at our disposal. Thank you, folks. I'm sorry we don't have more time to like get into it even more so. Badul, Britt, Elikim, and Ruth, you are all wonderful, wonderful. Oh, I'm getting a note from Cheryl. It's lunch break. Oh, great. So we can continue the conversation. Do you all have? We can go on for another 15 minutes or so then, if that works for you folks. Yes. Great. Okay. So thank you, Cheryl, over in the chat. I appreciate that. So I want to kind of put it back to you all. You've heard a lot of, like, I think, great design principles and things people are thinking about. I can feel you feeling me really resonates as like something we're trying to think about. Let me ask this question back to you all. are there things that can only be accomplished in person that you feel like, as a designer, I feel like has to be done really in that intimate, in-person, we can break bread together space? Or are there always ways to kind of build, a virtual place where we can kind of connect?
I can take a stab at this, and then I'm happy to hear what other folks say. I think if you had asked me this 2 years ago, I would have emphatically said, absolutely, there are only things that you can do in person, and you can do it in a virtual space. I don't think I would say that now. I feel like if you use the philosophy or the design principle that Britt just shared, which I love, is I can feel you feeling me. That is what we try to simulate and intentionally design for in-person spaces. And I think for those of us who have been doing fellowship and leadership and development, that's sort of what we are going for. And I think we had sort of rested on our laurels a bit, thinking that that only happens in immersive in-person spaces. In what I have seen, granted it's a short period of time over the last 2 years, in our virtual programming, that you can actually reach that with intentional design choices in the virtual space. So I will be interested in hearing from other folks who feel like there are concepts that only can happen. I think there's something about place-based learning, right? That I think some learning maybe, but not the connection. I actually think that you can build a really robust connection and community virtually in a way that I probably didn't believe 2 years ago.
I would add, thanks for that, Elkem, and John, it's a really good question. In truth, we've been able to move majority into the virtual and have the same learning outcomes and have the same connections and the depth of experience be fostered. So I've kind of put that question to bed last year. I was like, I'm so past that. But what I will be honest about with this group and share is that so one of the limitations of experience is like, if you in our programs, the deeper you go, they're very provoking conversations. So it's not a one-way delivery, right? Britt, to your point, these are actually engaged conversations. Everything that we do, we use case in point and we really provoke. And when you really provoke, you really have to give space for that provocation and that the brave space to be held. And that has to be done so carefully in the virtual space. And I've certainly seen that unless the design incorporates front end and back end a way to hold the individual as they've delved into something that, has touched a nerve or rubbed on something traumatic, it's hard. It's hard to then just be in this and hold them in the virtual space. And what happens? What happens when someone just like covers a screen, right? And boom, or they just close a screen and they're gone. What do you do? How do you reach out and then keep going? Because when we would do those provoking, deeper diving sessions in person, you can go after the person. You can give them space, but you can go after them. And you can always find that extra 30 minutes or an hour for a one-on-one coaching separately. And so the things that we're trying to incorporate now, it's like, okay, so one, there's something in the initial design that you have to incorporate to give space and set the context right, set the norms right and the ground rules right in order to manage that. And then you have to be so on point in reading the screen. Where are people going and where are they not? That's required. And then to buffer some space afterwards to pick up. There may be in a group of 15 or 20, maybe you need to have separate coaching conversations or one-on-ones with like 5 or 4. So you have to, as a facilitator or someone who's holding a cohort, you have to leave that space in. But I think that's the one that I keep coming back to on where the intentionality and the space is really critical. But otherwise, yeah, we can do this. there's so much you can do in the virtual.
And I think, I mean, in at least for me, in all honesty, it's like I don't think I know yet. I don't think I know until there's been enough in-person stuff. It's a little bit like the little meme, you know, could this have just been an email? Could this meeting have just been an email? Now it's like, could this training just have been on Zoom, right? Because there are so many things that we with my perennial hat on that are way better, if I'm just being honest, you know, like, I mean, in terms of whether it's logistical part and how expensive that is or time consuming that is, and like worrying if people have snacks, you know, versus just being able to like hit end meeting and like you're done, but you still had a really amazing outcome, right? And so where we are in the work we do is really being able to recalibrate and say, like, okay, well, what are we here to do? What are we here to try and move these leaders toward? And if we can do work that allows them to immediately not bracket it off and go travel somewhere and have a kind of a more retreat-like experience and then go back, but actually literally turn their screen off and go back into their leadership experience and then bring that back the next time we meet. I mean, it's such a more deep experience of the practical nature of the learning, right? So I don't think I'll totally know until I've had enough of those in-persons. And, you know, I was leading dozens of these a year, but to be able to see it enough and be like, oh, okay, like that right there, we can't do over Zoom. And I'm with you, Batul. It's like, yeah, I don't even know how useful of a conversation that is for us internally. I think more broadly it is, but for us, maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. There's just still so much to learn. I think for me, in creating programming virtually versus in person, there's definitely a shift that you see from relationship driven performance to intrinsic motivation. And a lot of the times you come into this really big spaces, and to Batul's point, there's so much emotion, it's charged, and you feel a kinship with the people that you're with in a way that you can't just like organically create that with some people having connectivity issues and some people off video and some people not saying anything. And so, you know, there's definitely that radical shift from where it's like, I actually care about Ruth because I was in her session and she challenged me in a way that spoke personally and uniquely to me, and we had a check-in afterwards and so on and so forth. So I'm going to follow up with that op-ed piece that I said I'd write, versus, you know, nothing is specifically targeted to you and you have to actively plug into what the values are of the system that you're participating in. What's the value of the programming to you individually, as opposed to what's your relationship with the people that you're collaborating with to drive that action. And so, you know, coming from a very heavily in-person focused programming model where we as a community are such a tight unit, and there is that understanding of that personal connection being part of our culture, to then shifting it to saying, okay, we're scaling up as a community. We're, you know, there's 1,000+ of us right now. This is not sustainable anyway. And then, you know, how can we have that same feeling of united purpose if we don't have the hangout after in-person programming, or we don't have, you know, your co-fellow being your best friend forever because they spent 13 months actually physically doing stuff with you through the trenches.
Man, it's great to hear all those perspectives and insights. It gives me hope too, because there's like so much more to explore in this space that I think is really compelling. In our last couple of minutes, it'd be fun to hear any examples you have where either as a designer or as, you know, as a participant, you're like, wow, that felt like a really connected space. Like what is something that just made it that way? I feel like a lot of us have been in kind of these sort of conversations where we get out of it, and to the point you were talking about, Britt, like, oh man, there's a lot of holes in how that was put together. And that just did not feel like I was able to show up as my authentic self, or I just felt disengaged. I know that's a big concern for a lot of us working in this environment, is somebody really paying attention to me, or are they checking email or Facebook or kind of doing whatever else? So when we talk about we want to create spaces that really connect people. Can you share with us? We don't need to go to everybody, but if you have an example where you're like, this is why we connected, and like this is underneath it, this is really what the design was that helped us to feel that sort of authentic connection.
I can give just a really quick one. So actually right now, I mean, literally right before we met, I was wrapping up to day 2 of our fellowship program that we're doing right now. And we have about 20 leaders from all over the world that are joining. And one of the ways that we kick off this program, or before it even starts, is we have this structure around basically where I'm from poem. And they kind of follow that, but then it's a video that they create, low grade with a phone and everything like that. And it's almost like a Mad Lib where you're sort of like filling in some of the things. And that, of course, one person sort of dips their toe in the water, which gives the permission for other people to take have the courage to do that. And it becomes this amazing thing where it's not just people sitting in a circle, abstractly imagining what it's like to be in Ghana in the home of Sylvester, but it's actually literally Sylvester's image of being in his home, talking about this, having the shared structure, talking about family and vision and dreams and all of these things. And it's such a simple way of using, of course, the phone, of posting on WhatsApp. And then it just has this sort of like this knitting together effect where I think as a designer, you're also thinking about not doing it all at once, but there are these steps that you're taking that are helping draw people in so that at some point they're able to drop into a deeper experience, right? I mean, any good facilitator knows that you can't just like expect people you're going to push them in, they're going to do it, right? So that has been this really simple thing that's literally only like 90 seconds or less that each person is sharing. But then when seen as like a mosaic of these things, of voices all over the world and where people are filming them, it's incredibly connective and just very powerful. Yep.
I mean, we have a number of activities that we do. I mean, it's not dissimilar from what Britt is sharing, but to really focus on the self so that you share about yourself first as a starting point. So there's a small number of activities that we do in the first seminar, like the first meetups, the first seminar are all about forming bonds, knowing one another, forming bonds, how you show up, setting the norms of how the group is going to operate, and then to really proceed from there. So there's an intentionality on that design part to get people in and showing up and being open. And Britt's right. All it takes is like, if the facilitator does it right and shares from themselves first, then it gives courage and permission for another person to do it. And once they do it, the group kind of opens up and really shows up.
Thanks, folks. Now we're at the half hour. So I want to express gratitude to all of you for joining us. Thank you for just a rich conversation and for, I think, helping to articulate and qualify some of the many considerations we are making in building communities in these new exciting spaces that give us lots of different opportunities and require us to really weigh as designers our purpose in terms of building community and how to do that. So Badul, Britt, Elham, Ruth, thank you for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. We deeply appreciate it. And to our audience who tuned in, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, John. And thanks to
everyone.
everyone else.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you all. It was so great talking with you.
Bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye.
To our audience, we have a quick break, and then we hope to see you in our next sessions.